Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by two-time Emmy Award winner Jabbar Raisani, the executive producer, visual effects supervisor, and director for season one of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and four-time Emmy nominee Marion Spates, the visual effects supervisor for season one of Avatar: The Last Airbender as well. You guys are so great, and your resumes are, if people want to look them up, are incredible. You've worked on so many massive shows: Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, the MCU, on and on. The visual effects, though, for this show feel, I guess I would say, uniquely challenging just because it's based on an anime series at the start, right? So that audiences are really familiar with and have a great affection towards. So I guess, like, how did you guys approach that from a visual effects standpoint to make it, to undertake this massive project?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to be as inspired as we could by the animated series. So really, we kept revisiting the animated show. I can talk specifically about a few things, the design for Appa, for example. When you look through the entire animated series, Appa is actually drawn differently in different frames. And so we have to take all those different versions of Appa and really like come up with one version that looks and feels like Appa. And that was like super challenging. But I think the way that we did it was really found our favorite frames and the ones we thought like embodied the character the most. And then it was like literally like close your eyes and like think of what 3D Appa looks like and like open your eyes and look at the design. Like, did we get that? And it was like just a back and forth of really trying to find that thing that you imagined in your head that was based on all the animated reference.
And did you do that, like, so for Appa too? I guess that, I'm glad you brought up it. It looks great, and I guess I was wondering. I'm like, is it all digital, or is there a practical aspect to Appa too? And then did you kind of combine them, or how did you? I guess how did you do it, for lack of a better word? But it looks really great, and I guess I was like, how did you guys make this look so real?
Yeah, I mean, look, every pixel of Appa is digital, with the exception of the saddle, which is sometimes real. But we did have live action stuff on set. When Gordon runs up and hugs Appa's leg, there is a furry stand-in, so at least he's connecting with something. When Aang is about to leave the Southern Air Temple and he's having that real heart-to-heart moment with Appa before he flies off, there was a big, full-size blue Appa face that Gordon could interact with. That face didn't animate, didn't have features, but it really helped Gordon to connect emotionally with the character.
So it's incredible, and like that's just Appa, like you said. Like I'm like, this is just a massive. There's so many. It seems like there's so many visual effects in this show. I guess how do you guys like keep it all straight? I guess for like I just am like, again, like it seems like it's a huge undertaking. So how do you like keep it straight? And also, like you're saying, like going through the animated series, like if it's using that Appa as an example, like if it's different, like how do you keep it? Like, did you notice that was like that all the time, where everything is like the animated series is kind of, things are looking different. So then you have to like, that just seems like a lot of work, I guess, for lack of, that was the question. I guess like it seems like so much work. So
I mean,
yeah.
we basically, because we're just making one APA, that would work in every scenario. So we make sure he fits in every situation, obviously using our live action cameras, right? And even with the buck that we had, on set, there was a whole big buck that they could sit on that Aang would be sitting on. But again, the buck's hair just isn't long enough. It doesn't move like Appa's hair would move when it has wind on it. So we had to just take all that over. But the good thing is at least he's there and he's interacting something, which it helps make our job better for him to interact our digital hair into Aang and the surroundings of Aang.
And maybe talk about some of the bending too, because the bending we had similar challenges in the action sequences.
Yeah, and then the biggest thing overall, whether it's Appa or bending and everything, what we tried to do is just ground it to where it felt like something that was physical and breathable in our world, right? So with bending, for instance, the problem with bending is, it can start to look a little animated, or I'll call it campy in a way, right? Because it doesn't really obey real physics, right? So for like some of our airbending to me was one of the most challenging ones, was because airbending is something that you don't see, right?
Mhm.
How do you depict what airbending is, right? In the cartoon, you will find that they just give it a coolish color, and sometimes it's hard to tell, is that the dirt that came up from the cartoon anime or was that the airbending? So we really tried to add physical elements. So we leaned into the F-22 and F-22 heat distortion. There's a
Okay.
classic image that you can look up in F-22. You see the back of an engine. It's this really awesome heat distortion, like, and all the detail that it has in it. So that was one of our main ingredients. So then what we would do is we would take the heat distortion and run it through these smoke simulations to give it different amplitude and frequencies. So we get a lot of depth, right, in the actual air bending, which helped just give it depth. And then we just said, okay, whatever environment he's in, we need to just pull the elements from that environment. So if he's, fighting Boomy, he's pulling sand. If he's on top of a ship, he's pulling water droplets, right? Or if he's in the snow, he pulls snow, which was another ingredient to just help give it depth and realism.
So you mentioned the air, the airbending. Obviously, I was wondering. I was like, the manipulation of all these elements is so key to the story. And like you said, the air, it seems very complicated. I imagine you had those kind of. I didn't, at the risk of just going down the line, but I was like, I had you like for was there what other one did you find most challenging? I mean, fire, water,
Water,
earth, like they're
water.
all,
We
yeah.
Water.
actually disagree on what's the hardest. So.
Okay, so what was yours, Jabbar?
I think water is the hardest.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought with water, like it's really hard to find reference of water doing the things we need it to do because, water wants to obey gravity. So we found some zero G reference and we did some slow motion tests. And it was really through those that we're like, okay, now I understand how we can at least approach water bending, hit the story requirements we have to hit. We have story we have to do. There's performance, as Katara is moving, we need the water to move exactly in tandem with what she's doing, and we can't deviate from that or it feels disconnected from her. And then we're breaking reality, but we need to have realism because we're a live action show. So there was all of these different masters. We had to serve them all in order to tell the story and put the visuals on screen.
Are you talking to, like you mentioned, like the acting, and like are you telling the actors how it's going to eventually look, I guess, or like how do you kind of approach so like it looks? I mean, like obviously you could like probably, again, I'm assuming you could make it look like follow what they're doing, like you said, like their hand movements and stuff like that. But did you make them aware of how like the visual effects would fit into what they're doing, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. As much as humanly possible, try to have the actors informed on what the water or element that they're bending is doing. Because I think it just helps them know, what to do, where to look, how to move based on what their element is doing. And, our stunt team did an awesome job of really preparing them for movement and doing movement training. So they really understood how to move like their, various forms. And that in tandem with understanding in visual effects terms what the bending was going to do, I think allowed them to really like see what was there without ever being able to see it until post.
How about another character? How about for creating Ko, which I love, and it just is incredibly upsetting looking. It's just very
Good.
terrifying. I guess
That's what we
like
want.
again, like really great, especially compared to looking at the anime series and like, oh, this is like you really get to like the essence of that, I guess. So what went into that and creating Ko, how it looks in the show?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we start off by looking at real world creatures.
Hmm.
Right, the mandrill, right, is the head that comes out of Ko. We looked at centipedes. We looked at different creatures that crawl with the multiple legs. The Ko mass, the traditional Ko mass, because we wanted to bring the realism of the Ko mass into it, right? But that's really our basis on how to make stuff look real. As we start with real world elements, and all of our creatures, we leaned into real world, creatures to help, drive the realism.
And then for Ko, there was like an overriding principle. I was like, I just want it to be disgusting. Like
Yeah.
when you're there with Ko, like I want to feel like you want to get away from him as quickly as possible. Because then, Aang is stuck there right next to him, but like everything should be telling him to get away.
That's really great. Do you have like, I guess, I don't know. I was like the visual effects on this are so like with Ko and just even like Appa, like we're saying, like there's a real weight to this stuff. I don't know how to like other describe it than that. And like a lot of times, I think sometimes you'll see visual effects where they feel weightless, right? And it really takes you out as a viewer. Is there a trick to that or a key to that to you guys to make this stuff feel like it's as big as it needs to be or as mass as it needs to be, right? Even though it's digitally created.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I lean heavily on Marion, who works with our vendors on really capturing weight. And I think really we look at a lot of reference.
Yeah.
There is a ton of reference we study. So when we're doing something like Appa, we're looking at hippos, we're looking at elephants, we're looking at how creatures of that scale move. For when Appa's flying, that's another whole issue where you're like, well, he's flying. So obviously there's some defying of his weight that he's able to do. But we looked at baby hippos swimming, which they're large enough, they have mass and they have to move through the water, but they move in a way that, is somewhat weightless because they're underwater, and manatees as well for Appa. So it's about, even when you have to do things that do defy gravity, finding things that are obeying our rules of physics that have weight and seeing how they move. Because when, manatee's tail moves, there's a lot of mass that is moving. And you see all these other things that happen in the body that are used to push such a large tail. So it's a lot of studying reference.
Wow. Yeah. I just think that's great because I'm like, it does feel, it just as a viewer, it makes it, again, it makes it feel more real. I'm assuming is that even though it's a fan, like that's got to be the goal, right? To make it feel real, even if it's a big fantasy world that's unreal, right? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's been our goal ever since back into Lost in Space, right? It's like, we're working on shows that a lot of times this stuff isn't real, but how can we make it real and feel physical, which, ultimately makes it feel grounded.
Hmm. And for you, what was, I mean, it sounds like many challenges, but I'll ask you to pick what was the biggest challenge, I guess, in this show that you were like, oh man, I wonder how this is going to work. And you ended up pulling off.
God, maybe
Yeah.
Whalezilla. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
several.
yeah.
Whalezilla, that whole sequence, Koizilla was one of our biggest challenges. It just the scope and scale of what we wanted to achieve there. We did it in previs with our previs team that was in house. Dirk Volk and Jared Higgins came up with a lot of those ideas, and it was great, but it was something that was only in previs. And you're like, okay, this is really great previs, but each one of these shots is like a full simulated environment. Every character is fully digital, including like all the performers on the deck that are, get wiped out by Whalezilla. So yeah, I think that was the biggest challenge. It was like we had a really good idea of what we wanted and understanding of the sequence, but going from that to the final imagery was like, man, that is a lot of lifting that we got to do between here and there.
Yeah, and also with Wellzilla, because he's a water creature, at first, naturally, we were giving it more of a fluidity to it, but it was like, no, he's big. He needs to be like Godzilla. So we literally put a character in him with legs, so that way he would feel like
Yeah,
he
speaking
has
of
the
scale
right
and
weight.
weight, yeah,
Huh.
that's one of those things where we really struggled to get the weight, and then Marion's like, just give him legs, and we'll never see them, but if he moves like he has legs, we'll feel the weight because we'll understand what his body's supposed to do.
That's amazing. You guys, I mean, like you said, you guys have worked together a lot. Like, does that come, are you able, do you feel like that like enhances this or like gives you, like you kind of just are maybe have a shorthand together where you're just able to figure this stuff out? Whereas if you worked with somebody you had not this familiarity, maybe you would not.
Yeah, I think it's two things, right? There's a shorthand certainly where we can be like, remember on Stranger Things when we did that shot with Vecna, and we're like, yeah, let's do that, and then like no more conversation has to happen. And the other thing I think is just trust, right? If Marion or Jared or Dirk is going to take over a sequence and really start pushing it, we trust each other to like really move it in the right direction, and we don't have like, oh, there's a ton of oversight to make sure like, is that the right choice? It's like, hey, show it to me when you think it's in a good spot for me to review, and that might be 2 weeks, and it might be so far along that we can't dramatically change it, but that's goes along with having trust in each other and as artists.
And then I guess just I know obviously the show's coming back for season 2, which I'm sure fans are very
And three.
excited about, and 3, right? So I guess like what can you tease or like what have you guys already been thinking of for those future seasons here that we'll get to see?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're still closely looking at the animated series, right, and being inspired by that. And so I think there will be some big moments that, fans will be familiar with, but they'll be new and fresh and, just as big as season one. We certainly want to keep the scope and the scale and the realism. We just want to do all the same, but even better. We know how to make the show at this point, you know what I mean? So we want to make it again, but do an even better job and have the fans love it all over again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the fan response I thought has been really strong. Is that like does that feel good when you're like taking this kind of property that is so beloved to get like that kind of response?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely stressful, right? I was a huge fan of the show, the animated series. So I was like, man, okay, we've got people that are way bigger fans than I am, and I'm a big fan, and like, I think this is a big deal. So yeah, again, we kept going back to the animated series because we knew if we could just, if you do enough things, even if someone can't be like, oh, they did that, they matched that, and they match that, and sometimes you can, but even the stuff that you can't put your finger on, I think we just try to get the essence of the show. So when you watch it, you're like, oh man, I'm getting the same feelings I had. The other thing that's kind of weird is like when you look back at something that that you watched 15 years ago, you're kind of thinking about it through your, I'll call it your adult brain.
Mhm.
And so it may not be exactly what it was that it is in your mind. So you're also trying to like match that to like, okay, me as an adult, what is that? What did that feel like when I was a kid? Because I need to get that feeling again, but now I'm older. So it has to be a little bit different to try to get the same feelings.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I mean, I think that's the like a really tricky thing, right? Because it's like your memory of something, especially something you watch as a kid, is not going to be what it is when you go back and rewatch it or whatever it is. And I think you guys do just a phenomenal job on this show. Season 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. You can watch all the episodes now on Netflix, and can't wait for seasons 2 and 3 as well. Jabbar Raisani and Marion Spates, thank you so much for doing this.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
man.